And let's finish up the 16th chapter of the second book of A Tale of Two Cities. Still Knitting is the name of the chapter. The Golden Thread is the name of the book. And speaking of the Golden Thread, the spy has been in the Defarges wine shop by himself with the Defarges, and has not really gotten them to respond to anything he said until he mentioned that Miss Manette is going to be married. Yes, Miss Manette is going to be married, but not to an Englishman, to one who, like herself, is French by birth. And speaking of Gaspard, poor Gaspard, it was cruel, cruel. It is a curious thing that she is going to marry the nephew of Monsieur the Marquis, for whom Gaspard was exalted to that height of so many feet. In other words, the present Marquis. But he lives unknown in England. He is no Marquis there. He is Mr. Charles Darnay, de Honoras, de Aulnayes is the name of his mother's family. Madame Defarge knitted steadily, but the intelligence had a palpable effect upon her husband. Do what he would behind the little counter, as to the striking of a light and the lighting of his pipe, he was troubled, and his hand was not trustworthy. The spy would have been no spy if he had failed to see it or to record it in his mind. Having made at least this one hit, whatever it might prove to be worth, and no customers coming in to help him, or any other, Mr. Bassard paid for what he had drunk, and took his leave, taking occasion to say in a genteel manner before he departed that he looked forward to the pleasure of seeing Monsieur and Madame Defarge again. For some minutes after he had emerged into the outer presence of Saint Antoine, husband and wife remained exactly as he had left them, lest he should come back. "Can it be true?" said Defarge in a low voice, looking down at his wife as he stood smoking with his hand on the back of her chair. "What he has said about Mademoiselle Manette?" "As he has said it," returned Madame, lifting her eyebrows a little, "it is probably false, but it may be true." "If it is," Defarge began and stopped. "If it is," repeated his wife. "If it does come, while we live to see it through, I hope, for her sake, destiny will keep her husband out of France." "Her husband's destiny," said Madame Defarge with the usual composure, "would take him where he is to go, and would lead him to the end. That is, to end him. That is all I know." "But it is very strange now, at least." "It is not very strange," said Defarge, rather pleadingly, with his wife, to induce her to admit it, "that after all our sympathy for Monsieur, her father, and herself, her husband's name should be proscribed under your hand at this moment by the side of that infernal dog who has just left. Stranger things than that will happen when it does come," answered Madame. "I have them both here of a certainty, and they are both here for their merits. That is enough." She rolled up her knitting when she had said those words, and presently took the rose out of the handkerchief that was wound around her head. Either Saint Antoine had an instinctive sense that the objectionable decoration was gone, or Saint Antoine was on the watch for its disappearance. Howbeit the saint took courage to lounge it. Very shortly afterwards, and the wine shop recovered its habitual aspect. In the evening, at what season of all others, Saint Antoine turned himself inside out, and sat on doorsteps and window ledges, and came to the corners of the vile streets and courts for a breath of air, Madame Defarge, with her work in her hand, was accustomed to pass from place to place and from group to group. A missionary, there were many like her, such as the world will do well never to breed again. All the women knitted. They knitted worthless things, but the mechanical work was a mechanical substitute for eating and drinking. The hands moved for the jaws, and the digestive apparatus of the bony fingers had been still. The stomachs would have been more famine-pinched. But as the fingers went, the eyes went, and the thoughts, and as Madame Defarge moved on from group to group, all three went quicker and fiercer among every little knot of women that she had spoken with and left behind. Her husband smoked at his door, looking after her with admiration. "A great woman," he said, "a strong woman, a grand woman, a frightfully grand woman." Darkness closed around, And then came the ringing of church bells and the distant beating of the drums of the royal guard as the women sat knitting, knitting. Darkness encompassed them. Another darkness was closing in as surely, when the church bells, then ringing pleasantly, and many an airy steeple over France should be melted into thundering cannon, when the drums should be beating on to drown a wretched voice. That night, all potent as the voice of power and plenty, freedom and life, so much was closing in about the women who sat knitting, knitting, that they, their very selves, were closing in around a structure yet unbuilt, where they were to sit knitting, knitting, counting dropping heads. And that's the end of chapter 16.